The great hall of Bjornvik had never been so quiet. Freydis stood in the center of it, hands at her sides, spine straight, and felt the silence press against her skin like something solid. Every wolf in the pack had come. They lined the walls, filled the benches, crowded the doorway, some summoned, others drawn by word that travels faster than feet in a pack settlement. Vidar stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. He hadn't taken her hand or placed his palm at her back. He simply stood, still as stone, steady as old wood, and that steadiness was its own kind of holding. Alpha Egbert sat at the head of the hall. He was a large man, broad through the chest, heavy in the jaw, with the authority of someone who had held power long enough that it had settled into the way he occupied space. He looked at Freydis the way he always had, as if she were a small complication in an otherwise orderly world. He had asked Vidar one last time. She'd heard it herself, waiting at the hall's edge. Your mate has asked to leave the pack. You are Bjornvik's finest tracker. You have standing here, a future here. Is this truly your decision? Vidar's answer had carried through the wood and stone just as clearly. Wherever she goes, I go. Murmuring after that. Her name in it, and Vidar's, in the particular tone people use when they cannot quite call something shameful but wish they could. Now Egbert rose from his seat. The hall stilled completely. He came down from the platform slowly. Men like Egbert never hurried, and stopped before them. His eyes moved to Vidar first. A long look. Then to Freydis. Whatever he saw in her face, it did not move him. Freydis of Bjornvik. His voice reached every corner, every packed-in body, every held breath. You have declared your intention to leave this pack, to abandon your bond, your place, your obligations to your people. She said nothing. She hadn't been given leave to speak, and she'd learned long ago that speaking without it only gave them more to use against her. Vidar of Bjornvik. Egbert's gaze shifted. A wolf of proven honor. A wolf this pack has relied upon. You choose to follow her. I choose my mate, Vidar said, simply, without heat. Something moved across Egbert's face, too fast to name, gone before it could be read. He raised his right hand. Freydis had prepared for this moment, had told herself she was ready for it, had rehearsed the severance in the quiet of her own chest, the thread cut from the pack's collective warmth, the shared pulse of belonging she had barely been permitted to feel, even when she technically possessed it. She had told herself it wouldn't hurt. She had been wrong. By the authority of this pack, and by the law that governs all wolf kind, Egbert said, I declare Freydis and Vidar severed from the bonds of Bjornvik. Their names are struck from the pack record. Their claim to pack land, pack protection, and pack kin is ended. They leave as they stand, with what they carry and nothing more. He lowered his hand. They are outcasts. The word landed like a stone in still water. She felt it in her chest, not the breaking of something cherished, but the removal of something she'd been carrying so long she'd stopped noticing its weight. The pack bond, thin and grudging as it had always been, withdrew. A door closing in a room she'd never truly been invited into. She did not waver. She would not give them that. Beside her, Vidar exhaled once through his nose, controlled, quiet. She felt the small change in him, his birth pack bond leaving, and knew this one had cost him genuinely. He had been woven into Bjornvik. What he was giving up was real. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't need comfort, and he knew she didn't either. They stood together in the altered air of what had just happened and let it settle. Freydis looked at the faces lining the walls. She recognized most of them. She had farmed land adjacent to theirs, sat in the same hall during feast seasons, known their names and their children's names, and the small private disasters of their lives, even when they had refused to know hers. Some looked away when her gaze reached them. Gerda, who had called her wolfless to her face when they were young and laughed about it after, stared at the floor with particular intensity. None of them spoke. "Then we'll go," Freydis said. She said it to Egbert, but meant it for all of them. She turned and walked toward the door. Vidar fell into step beside her. The crowd parted, not with ceremony, not with cruelty, just the simple physics of people moving aside for those who are leaving. She did not look back. The doors opened to a gray morning sky, wide and indifferent, and Freydis walked out into it with her mate at her side, and nothing ahead of her but everything that had not yet happened. It was, she would think later, the first honest moment Bjornvik had ever given her. She had not shifted on the day the others did. That was where everything had truly begun. She'd been 15, standing in a forest clearing with the other young wolves on the night of the first autumn moon, the traditional night of first shifting, when the young answered the call and became fully what they were. One by one they had answered. The crack and shimmer of changing bone, the first raw howls lifting into the dark. Freydis had stood in the middle of it and felt nothing. No pull, no shimmer, no call. Her mother, Sigrun, had held her hand on the walk home. "Late bloomer," she'd said softly. "It happens. You'll see." 16, 17, 18, nothing. The word began as a whisper. Wolfless, said at the edges of her hearing, the way people say things they know are cruel but cannot resist. By her 19th year, it had stopped whispering. It had become the particular flatness with which people said her name. Not hateful, exactly, but absent of warmth. A name they said and meant less than they should. Her father had died young, a hunting injury that turned bad before the healers could reach him. She remembered him in pieces. The roughness of his hands, the smell of pine resin, the way he looked at her mother as if still surprised, years later, that she had chosen him. After he was gone, her mother had carried everything. The pack had its ways of punishing those who stood too close to its outcasts. When the whispers about Freydis grew sharp enough, they turned on Sigrun too. The oldest accusation, the kind that can't be disproven. Infidelity with a human, they said. That's why the girl has no wolf. The blood is bad. Sigrun had never recovered. Not from the accusation, and not from watching her daughter try to belong to a place that had decided she didn't. The light went out of her slowly, not all at once, but in gradual, inexorable diminishing. She died in Freydis's 22nd year, in the early gray of a cold spring morning. Not from illness exactly, but from grief that had never been allowed to set down its load. Freydis had buried her in the farmland at the edge of pack territory, in dark and willing soil, and had knelt in the turned earth for a long time afterward, feeling something break open inside her chest that never fully closed again. She had stayed, after that, not because she felt welcome, because leaving felt like agreeing with them. The plants had found her the way important things often did, quietly, from the side, without announcing themselves. She had always felt most herself outdoors. In the long years of her isolation, when pack roles were assigned around her, and never to her, she had drifted toward the farmland at the settlement's edge. There was something in the earth that did not withdraw when she approached. The rows of crops did not fall quiet when she sat among them. She began sitting in the fields in the evenings, her back against a fence post, each fingers pressing into the loam while the settlement wound down behind her. It felt at first simply like peace, the absence of the particular exhaustion of being tolerated. Then, in her 27th year, something changed. She had been sitting in the half-light with both palms flat to the earth when understanding arrived, fully formed, the way knowledge comes sometimes in the moment between waking and sleep. The field was dry 3 inches below the surface, though the topsoil looked moist. The roots were thirsty. Something in the mineral balance had shifted. She knew, without knowing how she knew, exactly what was needed. Not a voice, not words. Something older than either. A direct transmission from living thing to living thing, soil to skin, need to comprehension. She tried to tell the chief farmer, Ormer, the next morning. He looked at her the way people look at something they've already decided not to take seriously. "The fields are managed by those who understand them," he said, and turned away before she'd finished speaking. So she did it herself. On her own small plot at the edge of packland, she applied what the plants told her, adjusted the water timing, amended the soil, rotated the beds in a pattern she couldn't fully explain but couldn't ignore. By midsummer, her crops were the best in Bjornvik. Not marginally. The gap was visible from the road, obvious enough that even people who had spent years perfecting the art of not seeing Freydis couldn't avoid seeing this. The pack watched it with the discomfort of people confronted with evidence that contradicts a conclusion they've already committed to. It hadn't taken long for the word to change. Wolfless had been one thing. Which was worse? Vidar had come into her life sideways, the way important things did. He was the pack's best tracker, lean and precise, with a stillness most people mistook for coldness. He appeared at her fence post one evening without announcing himself, and Freydis had looked up expecting mockery and found instead a man studying her crops with genuine attention. "What did you do differently?" he asked. She told him the practical elements. He listened without the expression of polite disinterest she'd learned to recognize at 30 paces. "That's clever," he said when she finished. One nod. Then he left. He came back. Not every day. He wasn't obvious about it. But regularly, always with a question that told her he'd been thinking about their last conversation. He brought her a cutting tool she'd mentioned needing, set it on the fence post without comment. He noticed when she was tired and adjusted accordingly. When he finally spoke the words of a mate's proposal, she refused him. "You feel sorry for me," she said. "You're the pack's finest tracker. You've decided to use your standing to lift the wolfless woman. That's not mating, that's charity." He hadn't argued. He looked at her for a long moment. "I understand why you think that. You've had good reasons to." And he walked away. It was that, the walking away without pressing, that had undone her eventually. A man performing charity would have needed her to see it his way. Vidar had stated his position, acknowledged her reasoning, and left the door open. 6 months later, she had walked through it. It had been the best decision of her life. The summer the pack crops failed, the witch talk became something uglier. Her fields were thriving. Bjornvik's were not. The gap was too large, too visible, and far too convenient for people who needed somewhere to put their fear. "Let me show you," Freydis said to Ormer, to the council, to anyone who would receive her. "Everything I do can be taught. It isn't magic. It's the soil, the water, the timing. Give me an afternoon." No one gave her the afternoon. Vidar went to the council himself, set his years of service and earned reputation on the table like a quiet offering. They heard him out with the careful attention they reserved for wolves, whose standing still meant something. Then they dismissed him. Politely. Completely. He said nothing about it on the walk home. She made tea and he sat across from her in the quiet of their small house, and neither needed to name what they both understood. And yet when she came to him with what was pressing against the inside of her chest, the drought she could feel coming the way she felt everything, through soles and fingertips, through the deep, slow conversation of soil and root, he hadn't hesitated. "How long?" he asked. 2 seasons, perhaps 3. If they don't prepare now, then we go to Egbert." They went together. She laid it out clearly, the drought coming, the preparation needed, the specific changes to planting and water management that could carry Bjornvik through. She was thorough. She was calm. She set aside every year of accumulated humiliation and spoke only about the pack's survival. Egbert listened. She'd give him that. Then, A wolfless woman claims to predict seasons through her crops. The flatness in his voice was not cruel. It was something worse, indifferent. The council will consider it. They had not considered it. She had made the decision quietly, as she made most of her decisions. She hadn't stormed through the settlement or wept in front of witnesses. She sat with what she knew, that she had given this place everything she had, that the place had handed it back each time without interest, that there was nothing left to offer people who had decided before she opened her mouth that the answer was no. She went to Vidar that night. "I'm leaving," she said. "I want you to reject me as your mate. Stay with the pack. You still have standing here. You have a life here. A real one." The firelight moved across his face. "Wherever you go," he said, "I go. Vidar. I'm not discussing it. Not harshly, just finally." She swallowed the tightness in her throat. "All right," she said. They went to Egbert the following morning. The announcement was made. The hall filled. Egbert gave Vidar his last chance to step away, and Vidar stood beside her without a flicker. And Egbert spoke the words, "They are outcasts." Now they walked. The forest outside Bjornvik received them without ceremony. Roots and stones underfoot, the canopy closing overhead, the silence of old trees that had no opinion about human trouble. The settlement sounds faded behind them. And then there was only the forest, their footsteps, and the altered open quality of the air around two people who had just been cut free. Freydis breathed it in. There was grief in it. The pack bond, thin and grudging as it had always been, had still been something. Its absence felt like the phantom ache of a tooth pulled. The loss of her mother's grave on packland. The hall door closing for the last time. But underneath it, underneath all of it, something she hadn't expected. Relief. Pure, quiet, enormous relief. Vidar walked beside her without speaking. They moved through the long morning, through the afternoon, into the early dark of evening, and made camp under a wide pine with a fire burning small and steady between them. She pressed her palm to the forest floor before she slept. The earth here was different to Bjornvik's. Richer, less depleted, carrying the deep patience of land that hadn't been asked to produce beyond its means. It spoke to her steadily. Without judgment, "Peace will find the right ground," she murmured. Vidar, half asleep on the other side of the fire, said, "I know." She lay down and looked at the dark through the pine branches and felt, for the first time in as long as she could remember, that the future was entirely her own. She did not know yet what she was going to build. She did not know that she would build something so extraordinary that the pack that had called her nothing would one day travel through a dying season to find her. She did not know that Egbert himself would one day lower his knee to the earth before her. But the earth beneath her palm pulsed quietly, like a slow heartbeat, like a promise being kept. And she slept. On the third day, her feet gave out. She hadn't said anything, kept walking through the raw crack across her left heel, the skin torn against her boot, the particular hot throb that turned each step into a decision. She was not going to be the reason they stopped. Vidar stopped without warning. He turned and looked at her with the directness he used when he had already assessed a situation and made his conclusion. His gaze dropped to her gait, then back up. "How long?" he asked. "I'm fine." "How long, Freydis?" She pressed her lips together. "Since yesterday morning." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite anger, not quite pain. He crouched before her on the path, his back to her, and waited. "I can walk," she said. "I know you can," he said. "Get on." She stood in the morning light filtering through the trees. Then she stepped forward, put her hands on his shoulders, and let him take her weight. He carried her for the better part of 2 days. She pressed her face against the back of his neck on the 5th day, briefly, when she thought he might not notice. Feeling the warmth of him, the solid steadiness of his gait, the complete absence of resentment in every step. He had given up his standing, his bond, his home. He was carrying her through a forest, away from everything he'd known. He had not once made her feel the weight of any of it. "Vidar," she said quietly. Thank you." A pause, the forest around them, the sound of his boots on the path. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just find us good land." She almost smiled. "I will." On the 7th day, she felt it. They had been walking through dense forest, the light coming down green and filtered, when something shifted beneath her feet, a warmth rising through the soles of her boots, a rightness in the air, a quality of aliveness in the earth she recognized the way you recognize the smell of home. She stopped. Vidar stopped beside her. She crouched and pressed both palms flat to the ground. The earth spoke immediately. Deep soil, excellent drainage, a water source nearby, threading east, maybe 200 paces, enough light through the canopy. Mineral richness, her gift, read the way a healer reads a pulse. Strong, steady, capable. She closed her eyes. She could feel what this land could become. Not as a vision, it wasn't like that, but as a certainty, like a mathematical truth that arrived complete. This ground could feed people, many people, for a very long time. "Here," she said. Vidar surveyed the clearing, the tree line, the canopy gap, the slope of the ground. He walked its edges with the quiet, systematic attention of a tracker reading terrain. "Water's east," he said, "about 200 paces." He looked at her. "The soil?" "The best I've ever felt." She pressed her palms deeper. "It's like a room that's been waiting to be lived in." A long pause, the forest breathing around them. "Then we build here," he said. And with those 4 words, something that had been braced inside Freydis for longer than she could name, began, very slowly, to release. She didn't know yet what was coming. She didn't know about the farm that would grow so large it would appear at trading posts 2 territories away. She didn't know about the drought that would hollow out Bjornvik's fields and drive its alpha to his knees in the dirt before her. She knew only the earth under her hands, the man beside her, and the deep, unshakable certainty of what she was about to grow. She stood up. She rolled up her sleeves. She began. They built the cabin in the first weeks of autumn. Vidar felled the trees and shaped the timber. Freydis directed the foundations, not by measurement alone, but by feel, pressing her palms to the earth at intervals the way a healer presses along the spine. She told him where the ground was firmest, where the drainage ran, where the structure would sit truest. He built where she said without argument, with the clean efficiency of a man who understood that her knowledge and his skill were different tools serving the same purpose. The walls went up straight and tight. The roof held. The hearth drew well on the first night they lit it. Freydis sat on the floor with her back against the warm stone and her palms flat on the packed earth. And she listened. The land told her what it held and what it lacked. Where the water moved underground, where the light would land in winter, where the frost would settle first and lift last. She sat with it for a long time, not yet planning, just listening the way you listen to someone you want to understand before you ask anything of them. Vidar watched her from across the room, sharpening his hunting knife by the fire. "What does it say?" He always asked like this, not with skepticism, not with the careful politeness of someone humoring a belief they privately doubted, the way you ask someone to translate a language you don't speak but fully trust exists. "It says it's been waiting," Freydis said. He looked at her. "The soil here hasn't been farmed before. It's deep and rich and has everything crops need to grow well." She pressed her palms deeper. "It's going to be extraordinary land, if we treat it right." "Then we treat it right," he said, and went back to his knife. She looked at the fire, thought of Bjornvik, of Ormer turning away from her mid-sentence, of the council's polite, complete indifference. of the drought she had felt gathering at the edges of the seasons like a held breath, still pressing, still coming. She pushed the thought aside. She had work to do. She planted in the last warmth of autumn and through the first cold of early winter, working in layers. Ground preparation first, the amendment second, seeds third, water management last. She did not impose a plan onto the land. She asked what plan it already had and worked with it. The rows that emerged curved with the natural contours of the ground, followed the drainage, positioned each crop where it would find the right relationship of light and moisture and soil depth. Vidar hunted while she planted. He brought back game, preserved the surplus, ranged further into the surrounding forest, and mapped it with the systematic patience of a man who thought in terms of territory and long-term security. In the evenings he told her what he'd found, and she told him what she'd planted. And between them, they were building something that functioned, genuinely, practically, in a way that neither had managed inside the pack. The first green shoots appeared in early spring. Freydis stood at the edge of the field and watched them push through the turned earth, and felt something move through her chest that was different from anything she'd felt in Bjornvik. Not relief. Not the absence of pain. Something active. The specific satisfaction of a person doing exactly what they were made to do, in exactly the right conditions, without anyone trying to stop them. Vidar came to stand beside her. How long until harvest? The early beds in 6 weeks, the main crop by midsummer. And the drought, can you feel it still? She pressed the sole of her boot to the earth. It was there. Distant yet, but building. The slow tightening she'd first felt in Bjornvik's fields 2 years before she'd left. The withholding quality of a sky beginning to forget how to rain. It's coming, she said. We have 2 good seasons before it bites hard. I've planted for it. The deep-rooted crops will find their own water when the surface dries. The channels will hold what rainfall we get and release it slowly. He was quiet for a moment. And Bjornvik? She didn't answer immediately. They didn't plant for it, she said finally. They didn't prepare. By the time the drought arrives in full, their yield will be 1/3 of what it should be. A pause. Maybe less. Vidar said nothing. They both understood what that meant. The hungry winters, the depleted stores, the desperation of a pack that had been proud and was about to be humbled by the most basic of necessities. That's not your responsibility, he said, carefully, not cruelly. No, she agreed. She looked at the green shoots pushing through the dark earth. Small and certain, full of the stubborn aliveness of things that intend to grow. No, she said again, quieter this time. Other people came to them in that first year. Not many, a handful at first, then a few more. A mated pair living rough at the edges of a neighboring pack's territory, neither welcomed nor formally expelled. A young wolf who had left her pack over a dispute that left her with a broken rib and no desire to explain herself. An older man, unmated, who had heard about the farm at a trading post and walked 3 days to find it, arriving with nothing but a strong back and a willingness to work. Freydis had not planned for this, but she had felt the land's capacity, and she had planted accordingly, more than 2 people needed, because the earth had told her to, and she had learned to trust it even when she couldn't explain it, and she found each person work that suited them. Not by asking what they'd done before, pack roles often said nothing useful about a person's actual capacities, but by watching them move through the farm for a few days. The mated pair were meticulous. She put them on water management. The young wolf was restless and observant. Vidar took her on as a tracker's apprentice. The older man had hands that knew soil through decades. She worked beside him and found that he taught her as much as she taught him. By the end of the first summer, they were 12. By the end of the second, they were 23. The farm expanded in stages, each planned in consultation with the earth beneath it. Freydis walked the perimeter every morning with her hands trailing along the turned rows, listening, adjusting. She had built water channels that captured rainfall and released it slowly through the dry months. She had diversified the crops, not by preference but by instruction, because the earth told her what it could sustain, and she planted exactly that. Word reached the nearest trading post in the second summer. A merchant from 2 territories over appeared at their gate asking to purchase surplus grain. Freydis sold him what they didn't need and used the exchange to acquire seeds she couldn't produce herself. Varieties from further climates, root vegetables that held through long winters, herbs with medicinal properties. Vidar watched the transaction from a distance, and when the merchant had gone, came to stand beside her with a look she'd learned to read. "What?" she said. "Nothing, just thinking." "About what?" He looked at the farm, at the fields stretching out in their careful curved rows, green and dense and alive, at the people moving through them with the quiet purposefulness of a community that had found its work. "That they were wrong about you," he said. "Everyone who ever said you were nothing. They were so completely, entirely wrong about you." Freydis looked at the fields. She felt the familiar tightness in her throat and let it pass. "I know," she said finally. "I know." The drought arrived in the 3rd year. She had felt it coming for months. The slow tightening of the earth's deep moisture, the roots reaching further down as the upper soil dried. She had prepared meticulously. The water channels held. The deep-rooted crops endured. The storage cellars held reserves enough for 2 lean seasons. The farm was not unaffected. In-surface crops struggled and some were lost. But the farm held. The people on it were fed. And the surplus from 2 good seasons sat in the cellars like foresight made tangible. Beyond their property, the season told a different story. The surrounding territories were hurting. The drought had arrived in full force, and the packs that hadn't prepared were discovering the vulnerability of communities that had assumed the seasons would continue as they always had. She began to receive visitors. A scout from a neighboring pack, whose eyes tracked their fields with the careful attention of someone under instruction to assess. A trader who asked more questions about their storage methods than about the goods he was purchasing. A delegation from a pack 2 days' travel south, who came openly and said they were short of grain and asked if there was surplus to purchase. There was. She sold it fairly. Vidar said nothing about the pattern he was watching. She felt it too, the drought radiating outward like a slow tide, touching everything, and their farm standing in it like a thing that had known the storm was coming. And then, on a morning when the sky was pale and the earth dry even at depth, Freydis looked up from her work and saw a rider at the tree line. He carried a seal she recognized, Egbert's seal. She straightened slowly, brushed the soil from her hands, stood in the morning light, and watched the rider approach across the field path. He watched him take in the farm with the expression of a man who had expected something and found something else entirely. He stopped at the gate. "I bring a message from Alpha Egbert of Bjornvik." His voice carried formal precision. His eyes, however, were moving across the fields behind her. Freydis looked at him steadily. "Then deliver it." He held out the sealed message. She broke the seal and read it, then read it again. The drought had taken most of Bjornvik's harvest. Their stores would not last the winter. Egbert was requesting, she noted the word, permission to purchase grain. He acknowledged the request might not be received. He asked anyway. Freydis stood with the message in her hands and the dry wind moving across the fields. She thought of her mother's grave, on land that was no longer hers to visit. She thought of the council's dismissal, of Ormer turning away mid-sentence, of Egbert's voice. A wolfless woman claims to predict the weather, and the particular flatness of it. Indifference crueler than contempt, because it didn't even require the energy of disliking you. she thought of the hollow-cheeked children she had known in Bjornvik, the old men and women who had lived their whole lives in that settlement and had nothing to do with the cruelty directed at her, and were now facing a winter without enough food. She folded the message. Vidar had appeared at her shoulder without sound. He'd read it over her arm. She felt him waiting. "Your decision," he said, always those 2 words. The choice returned to her without pressure. She looked at the storage cellars, at the fields, at the careful abundance she had built from nothing, severed bonds and cracked heels and 7 days of walking, and the earth's patient instruction. "Tell your alpha," she said to the writer, "that he is welcome to come, that we have grain to sell, that the price will be fair." She paused. "And that he should come himself." The writer blinked. "Himself?" "Himself. And his counsel. I won't negotiate with a messenger." The writer looked at her. The wolfless woman declared an outcast on Egbert's word. And something moved across his face she couldn't fully read. He dipped his head. "I will carry the message." He turned his horse and rode. Freydis watched him until the tree line swallowed him. Then she turned back to her fields. Vidar stood beside her. "He'll come," he said. "I know," she said. "Are you ready for that?" She pressed the sole of her boot to the earth, feeling the dryness, the drought's grip, the deep reserves holding. "I've been ready for a long time," she said. He came 4 days later. Egbert arrived at the gate in the early afternoon, with 3 council members, the chief farmer Ormir, and 2 senior hunters. They had ridden hard. She could see it in the horses, in the dust on their coats, in the set of the alpha's jaw of a man who had been moving towards something he dreaded and had not allowed himself to slow down enough to reconsider. Freydis was in the fields when they arrived. She did not hurry in from them. She finished the row she was working, pressed her palms to the earth, stood and brushed her hands clean. Then she walked toward the gate at her own pace, through the field that was green and thriving in the middle of a drought that had stripped most of the surrounding territory bare. She watched Egbert's expression as she approached. He had not expected this. She could see it moving through him. The scale of it, the health of it, the sheer abundance of the farm that the wolfless outcast had built on land no one had offered her, with no pack behind her, no counsel, no standing in any territory she could have claimed. His eyes moved across the fields, across the storage buildings, across the 23 people working calmly through the rows, not one of them stopping to stare. His eyes came back to Freydis. And there it was. The thing she had not seen in his face in the great hall, nor in any of their faces for all the years she'd lived among them. Recognition. Real recognition. The kind that comes too late and knows it. She stopped before him. The gate was open. She had left it open. "Alpha Egbert," she said, even, unhurried. He looked at her for a long moment, and then Egbert of Bjornvik, alpha of a struggling pack, lowered himself to one knee in the dirt before her gate. His counsel followed. One by one, slowly they went down. Ormir last, the sight of him kneeling, Ormir, who had turned his back on her mid-sentence and told her the fields were managed by those who understood them, produced in Freydis not the satisfaction she might have expected, but something quieter and more complicated. Something that sat between grief and grace and had no clean name. Vidar stepped up beside her. She felt the warmth of him. Egbert raised his head. Freydis. His voice was steady, but it cost him something. She could hear it. "I have come to ask for your help. Bjornvik is struggling. Our harvest failed. Our stores will not carry us through winter." A pause. "I know what we did. I know what I did. I am not asking you to forgive it. I am asking only for the chance to purchase grain and to—" He stopped. He looked at the ground, then back up. "I am asking for the chance to make it right. Whatever right looks like to you. Whatever it costs." The autumn wind moved through the fields. The sound of the crops, alive, unhurried, deeply rooted, filled the silence. Freydis looked at him. She looked at Ormer, at the council, at the two hunters now kneeling in the dirt of a farm built by the woman their pack had called worthless. She had a great deal she could say. She had been composing it without meaning to for years. In the quiet evenings, in the early mornings, in the particular wakefulness of 3 a.m. when old wounds surface and ask to be examined. She had the words. She had earned the right to speak every one of them. But Vidar was beside her, and the fields were alive around her, and the earth pulsed beneath her feet with the slow patience of something that had always known this moment was coming. "Rise," she said. She said it the way she'd built her farm, without performance, without cruelty, without needing them to understand how much it cost her to say it cleanly. They rose. "We have grain," she said. "Root vegetables, preserved stores, enough surplus to see Bjornvik through the winter. The price will be fair." She met Egbert's eyes. "But the grain is not all I'm offering, and purchasing it is not all I'm asking of you." Egbert held her gaze. "Name it." "Not yet," she said. "Come inside, eat, rest your horses. We will talk when you have seen what's here, what was built, and how and by whom. Then we will talk about what comes next." He studied her face. Whatever he found there settled something in him. "All right," he said. She turned and led them through the gate, into the farm, into the life she had made from nothing on the far side of the worst day she had ever lived. Vidar fell into step at her shoulder. He said nothing. But as she walked, she heard him exhale. The slow, deep exhale of a man who had believed in something before it proved itself and was now watching the world catch up. She reached back without looking. His hand found hers. They walked through the gate together. The evening passed slowly. She fed them at the long table in the common hall, the hall Vidar and 3 others had built in the 2nd year. The food was plain and abundant. Grain bread, root stew, preserved meat, dried fruit. The kind of meal that spoke not of wealth but of competence, of a community that had looked ahead and was now eating the proof of it. Egbert sat at the table and ate with the careful attention of a man trying to understand something that was rearranging his thinking as he went. His counsel ate in silence. Oromar had not yet looked at her directly. After the meal, when the fire had burned low and the others had drifted to their cabins, Freydis stayed at the table with Egbert and 2 of his council. Vidar stayed with her. "Tell me about the drought," she said. "All of it. How long, how severe, what you still have." Egbert told her. She listened without interrupting, asking precise questions when she needed to. The harvest was at roughly a quarter of normal yield. Stored reserves already drawn down more than they should have been. The winter stores would run short before the first thaw, possibly badly short. "How many?" she asked. 200 wolves, Egbert said. "I can supply enough for the winter. Not comfortably, not with surplus, but enough." She looked at him steadily. "That's the grain. Now I want to talk about what happens after." "What do you want?" Egbert asked. Directly. She respected that. She didn't hesitate. "My husband's honor," she said, "restored, publicly, before the full pack." Her voice was even, but there was nothing soft in it. "What was taken from Vidar was not his to lose. He lost it because he stood with me, because he refused to let the pack's cruelty become his own. That cost was never fair. I want it returned." Egbert looked at Vidar. The firelight moved across both their faces. Something passed between the 2 men. The weight of a wrong that had been known and left unaddressed for too long, finally being named. Egbert turned back to her. "It will be done. Before the full pack. His honor restored in full." "And in return," Freydis said, "Bjornvik survives the winter." A silence. That's all you ask? Something in his voice had shifted. Not disbelief, but the careful attention of a man recalibrating. That's what I ask for? She said. He looked at her steadily. And for yourself? What do you want for yourself, Freydis? I like what I'm building here, she said. I have good land. People who work it honestly. A life that belongs to me. A pause. I don't need Bjornvik to give me anything I haven't already made. The fire settled between them. Ormiar was staring at the table. Egbert was quiet for a long moment. Then, I want you to come back. Freydis went still. Not because we need the grain, though we do. Not because the pack deserves it. I'm not certain we do. He looked at her steadily. Because you belong there. Because Bjornvik has been lesser without you. And most of us were too proud or too blind to see what we were losing when we let you walk out of that hall. Vidar's hand rested on the table near hers. Still. Steady. Freydis looked at Egbert across the low firelight. She thought of the hall, of the word outcast settling onto her skin like cold water, of her mother's grave on land she hadn't been permitted to visit. I'll come back, she said, if the pack will listen. Not tolerate, listen. If I can teach what I know and be heard when I speak. If Bjornvik's farmers will take instruction from me without it becoming another thing to hold against me. She let the words land. That's my condition. Not a title. Not an apology from every person who was unkind. Just the chance to be useful without having to fight for the right to it. Egbert nodded slowly. The pack will listen. I will make certain of it. The fire shifted. A log settled, sending sparks up into the dark. Egbert looked at Vidar once more. Not an apology, not yet, but the shape of one. Then back to Freydis. There is something else, he said. Something I've been sitting with since I rode through your gate. He gestured. A small movement that seemed to encompass the farm, the fields, everything she had built. Since before I sent the rider, if I'm honest. She waited. I am going to step down, he said. The silence was total. My lord, one of the council members began. I've made my decision, Egbert said, without heat. He looked at Freydis. A leader who cannot see the resources in front of him is not fit to lead. A leader who calls his most gifted wolf an outcast because she doesn't fit the shape he expects. He has already failed his pack, whether they know it yet or not. A pause. I failed mine, long before the drought. Freydis looked at him across the low firelight. She thought of the hall, of the word outcast, of Vidar's hand steady beside her as they walked out into the gray morning. She thought of her mother. What are you saying? She asked, though she already understood. Bjornvik needs a different kind of leader, Egbert said. The kind who understands what the land needs, who listens before deciding. His eyes held hers. The kind who warned us 2 years before the drought came, and whom we were too proud to hear. The fire burned low between them. Vidar had gone very still beside her. I won't make that decision tonight, Freydis said carefully, and I won't make it alone. She reached under the table and found Vidar's hand. We'll come to Bjornvik, she said. We'll bring the grain. We'll talk before the pack. All of us, openly. And then the pack will decide. She met Egbert's eyes. That's how it should have always been done. Everyone in the room, everyone's voice counted. Egbert looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Outside, the drought-dry wind moved through the fields. The crops held, deep-rooted, prepared, enduring. The earth pulsed steadily beneath the foundations of everything she had built. Freydis sat with her hand in Vidar's, and the weight of what was coming settling over her shoulders, like something she had, without knowing it, been growing strong enough to carry. Tomorrow they would begin loading the carts. The day after they would return to Bjornvik. And when they crossed that threshold again, not as outcasts, not as supplicants, not as anything the pack had previously decided they were, the reckoning that had been building since a gray morning and 2 severed bonds would finally have its full hearing. She pressed her free hand to the floor beneath the table. The earth answered her. Patient. Certain. Ready. They loaded the carts before dawn. 4 of them, heavy-bodied, ox-drawn, stacked with grain sacks and root vegetables and preserved stores, covered in oilcloth against the morning damp. The settlement worked by torchlight without being asked, loading steadily and without ceremony. Freydis walked the length of each cart when the loading was done, pressing her hand briefly to the sacks. Not for anything magical, just for sureness. The solidness of what she was about to carry back to the place that had called her nothing. Vidar appeared at her shoulder in the gray pre-dawn, 2 traveling cloaks over his arm. He held one out without speaking. She took it, fastened it at the throat, stood for a moment in the cool dark with the farm behind her and the road ahead. Ready? He asked. She thought of the great hall and the word that had landed on her skin like cold water. Her mother's grave, untended on packland for years. The hollow-cheeked children who had nothing to do with any of it. She thought about going back, not as the woman who had been cast out, but as the woman who had decided to return. Yes, she said. Egbert and his council had ridden ahead the previous evening. She had asked them to. She wanted the pack to know what was coming before the carts arrived. She wanted every wolf in Bjornvik standing in the square when she came through the gate, and with the full knowledge of what they were receiving and from whom. She wanted the truth in the room from the beginning. They set out as the first light broke gray and thin over the tree line, the carts rolling slow and heavy, Vidar riding beside her with the reins loose in his hands and his gaze on the road ahead. The forest received them without ceremony. The same trees she had walked through years before, moving in the opposite direction, with cracked heels and a severed bond and wide, uncertain sky above her. She looked at them now with the same eyes and felt something completely different in her chest. Not triumph. Not yet. Something quieter. Something that knew the day was not over. Bjornvik appeared through the trees in the mid-morning. The settlement looked smaller than she remembered. The thatched rooftops, the smoke from morning fires, the wooden palisade, all of it ordinary, all of it reduced to its actual size. The gate was open. And beyond it, filling the square and spilling into the adjoining streets, was the pack. All of them. Every wolf in Bjornvik, packed into the square, lining the road from gate to hall, standing 3 and 4 deep on either side. Some held torches against the gray morning. Some carried nothing but their own faces and the accumulated weight of what they had done and not done. Freydis kept her spine straight. She kept her eyes forward. The ox moved through the gate at its own unhurried pace, and the carts followed, and Freydis rode into Bjornvik for the first time in years, with 4 cartloads of food at her back, and not a single thing to prove. The crowd parted silently. No jeering, and no whispers, only boots shifting on packed earth, the quiet of people making room for something they had not expected to be standing in front of. She recognized faces as she passed. The woman who had called her wolfless when they were young, jaw set, eyes bright. The men who had stared at the floor the day the bond was severed. The farmers who had watched her crops thrive and decided it was witchcraft rather than knowledge. She did not harden her face at them. She did not soften it either. She simply looked, clearly, without flinching, taking it as it was. At the far end of the road, before the great hall, Egbert stood waiting. He had not dressed for ceremony. No elevated platform, no flanking council in their best. He stood on the ground, the way a man stands when he has decided to stop performing authority and simply exercise it. Beside him, a step back, stood his council. And beside the council, standing separately, Ormjar. The carts stopped. Freydis stepped down. Her feet met the ground of Bjornvik, and the earth rose to meet her the way it always did, quietly, attentively. She felt the drought's damage immediately. The exhaustion of the soil, the deep dryness, the roots pulling hard for whatever moisture was left. It moved through her like a low, aching sound. She could fix this. She had always known she could fix this. Vidar came to stand beside her, looking straight ahead with the stillness of a wolf who has decided what he believes and has no need to announce it. Egbert stepped forward. "Wolves of Bjornvik." His voice carried across the square without effort. "You know why we have gathered. You know who has come." The crowd was entirely silent. "What you may not know is the full account of it, so I am going to give it to you now, plainly, because a pack cannot make a sound decision on a partial truth." He turned to face the crowd fully. "Freydis came to us with a warning. She told us a drought was coming. She told us how to prepare. She had grown what you can see behind her. 4 carts of food. On land no one gave her, with no pack behind her, with nothing but her own knowledge and her mate's partnership and her refusal to become what we tried to make her." A sound moved through the crowd. Not words. Something underneath words. "We didn't listen," Egbert said. "I didn't listen. And the consequence is a pack facing a winter that should have been survivable, standing in a square receiving food from the woman we called an outcast." He paused. "That is the truth. I am not going to dress it differently." The silence that followed had weight. Freydis stood in it and let it settle. Then Egbert turned to Vidar. "Vidar of Bjornvik." Vidar met his gaze, composed, completely still. "You were this pack's finest tracker. You served Bjornvik with honor and skill for more years than many of these wolves have been alive. When you chose to stand with your mate, when you refused to let her face what she faced alone, we treated that choice as a failure." The words cost him. You could hear it. "We were wrong. What you did was not weakness. It was the truest expression of honor this pack has seen in a generation, and I am sorry it took this long to say so." Something shifted in Vidar's face. Almost nothing. Just a small movement at the jaw. The adjustment of a man absorbing something he hadn't known he still needed. Freydis felt it move through their mate bond like a ripple through still water. She kept her face steady. "Before this pack and by the authority still vested in me," Egbert said, "I restore to Vidar his full honor, his standing, and his name as Bjornvik's finest tracker. What was taken is returned. What was damaged is repaired. Let it be known and remembered." The sound from the crowd was not a cheer. Something older. A release. A collective exhale. The sound of a wrong being set right in front of witnesses who had been present for the original damage. Vidar nodded once. His hand found Freydis's, and she held it. Then Egbert turned back to the pack and said the thing no one had been prepared for. "I am stepping down as Alpha of Bjornvik." The square erupted, not in disorder, but in the sudden urgent sound of a community whose certainty has shifted beneath its feet. Egbert raised his hand. The noise settled. "I have led this pack for 19 years. The worst of my decisions was not a single act. It was a pattern, looking at what I couldn't immediately understand and deciding it had no value." He looked at Freydis, looking at this woman and seeing a problem instead of a gift. Freydis stood very still. A pack deserves a leader who can see, without the obstruction of pride, without deciding the answer before hearing the question. He turned to the crowd. "I am not that leader, and I will not compound the error by continuing." The silence returned, deeper, more uncertain. "Then who?" a voice called, not hostile, genuinely asking. Egbert looked at Freydis. He didn't gesture, didn't announce. He simply looked, and the direction of his gaze answered the question before his words did. "That," he said quietly, "is for the pack to decide." They decided. It did not take long. She had expected deliberation, resistance, the complicated politics of a pack rearranging its hierarchy. She had expected a fight. There was no fight. Recognition moved through the crowd, the way dawn moves through a dark room, steadily, inevitably, until the dark was simply gone. Face by face, the pack turned toward her with the quality of people arriving at a conclusion they had been approaching without knowing it. An elder stepped forward first. A woman Freydis remembered from childhood, one of the few who had never been unkind, only silent, which was its own failing but a lesser one. "She warned us," the elder said to the square. "She warned us and we didn't listen, and the proof is standing in front of us on 4 carts. She looked at Freydis. "I would follow you, if you'll have us." Another voice, then another. Freydis stood in the middle of it and let it come, not performing anything, just standing in it and feeling what it actually was. Not vindication, exactly. Something more complicated and more true. The feeling of a long, wrong beginning, slowly, imperfectly to be set right. She looked at Vidar. The careful, steady attention of a man who had believed in something before the world caught up. He nodded once. She turned to face the pack. "I'll lead," she said. "But not as it's been done before. Not from a platform above the rest of you. Not by deciding what you need without asking. The land has taught me that you cannot impose a plan on living things. You listen first, then work with what's there." She looked across the gathered faces. "That's how I'll lead. By listening. By teaching what I know and learning what I don't. By making Bjornvik the kind of pack that survives not because it's powerful, but because it's wise." The square was very still. "The drought isn't over. This winter will be hard even with what I've brought. There is real work ahead, the kind that requires every person in this pack." A pause. "But I've built something from nothing before. I know what this land can do when it's properly tended, and I intend to show you." No one spoke. Then from somewhere in the crowd, a single wolf lowered to one knee. Then another. Then the rest. Not all at once. Not with ceremony. But in the uneven, genuine way of people making a real choice rather than performing one. Some quickly. Some slowly. Some with eyes down. Some looking straight at her. Oromar was the last. He went down slowly, an old man's knees on cold ground, and when he raised his eyes to hers, they held something she had not seen in them in all the years she'd tried to show him what she knew. Willingness. Later, after the grain had been unloaded, after the cart stood empty and the square had thinned, Freydis stood alone at its edge. She pressed her palms to the ground of Bjornvik. The earth spoke immediately. The drought's damage was deep. Years of preparation missed, soil depleted, water management inadequate. 2 seasons of careful work before the land began to recover. She had known there would be. The earth was tired, but it was alive. And alive meant workable. Alive meant something she could listen to and gradually, patiently, restore. She heard Vidar before she saw him. Familiar footsteps, unhurried on the packed earth. He crouched beside her. "How bad is it?" "Bad," she said. 2 seasons of real work before it starts responding. But it's recoverable." He nodded. She looked at his face in the pale winter light. The steadiness of it. The complete absence of regret. "You should know," she said quietly, "that none of this would exist without you. Not the farm, not today, not any of it." He looked at her with that expression she loved, almost impatient with sentiment, but not quite. "I know what I chose," he said. "I'd choose it again, every time." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she leaned forward and kissed him. There, in the square of Bjornvik, in front of the remaining wolves and the empty carts and the pale winter sky, in the place that had once declared them both nothing. She felt him smile against her mouth. When she pulled back, several people had stopped to watch. She met their eyes without embarrassment. Let them see. This was her mate. The man who had carried her through a forest, believed in her gift before it proved itself, stood beside her when standing cost him everything. She stood up. She turned to face Bjornvik, the rooftops, the hall, the scarred and drought-thinned fields, the wide grey sky above it all. There was so much work ahead. She was ready for all of it. The first thing she did as leader of Bjornvik was walk the fields. Not with ceremony. Just herself, alone, in the early morning light. Bare feet on the frozen earth. Palms pressed to the soil at intervals, listening to what Bjornvik's land had been trying to say for years to people who hadn't known how to hear it. It told her everything. The places that needed amendment, where channels could be cut to reach the water table, the crops that would endure and the ones that wouldn't, the patches over-farmed and needing rest, and the patches never farmed at all, holding their capacity untouched like a reserve she hadn't known to expect. She walked for 2 hours, carrying nothing but the knowledge accumulating as she moved. When she returned, she went to find Ormar. He was in the storage barn, cataloging the meager drought-reduced yield. He looked up when she entered, said nothing, waited. "I've walked the fields," she said. "I know what we're working with and what needs to happen. I need you to work with me. Not for me, with me. What you know about these fields and the people who farm them I don't have. What I know about what the soil needs, you haven't been able to hear." She looked at him steadily. "Together we fix this faster than either of us could alone." Ormar looked at her for a long moment. She could see in his face the long history of his resistance. Years of pride maintained so stubbornly it had become conviction. She could see the cost of setting it down. "Tell me what you found," he said finally, "in the fields." She told him. He listened, really listened, with the full weight of his attention and the willingness to let what he heard rearrange what he thought he knew. When she finished, he was quiet. Then, "The north field. I always thought the drainage was the problem." "The drainage is the symptom," she said. "The soil is the cause." He thought about that. She watched him think. "All right," he said. "Show me." Spring came late that year, and thin. The drought withdrew in stages, grudgingly, leaving cracked earth and low water tables, and the thinness of early growth. But Bjornvik's fields were not what they had been. Freydis had spent the winter teaching, not from a platform, but in the fields themselves, crouching in the turned earth with the farmers, pressing her palms to the soil and showing them how to amend it. Some understood quickly. Some needed the same lesson several times. Some never heard the way she heard. That was fine. She didn't expect them to carry her gift. She expected them to learn the practices: water management, soil care, rotation, diversification, enough to make the land resilient whether or not they could feel it speaking. Ormar worked beside her every day. Not an easy partner, set in his ways, occasionally stubborn, but honest. He told her when he disagreed, and when she'd been right about something he'd doubted. And those two qualities made him more useful than a man who agreed with everything. By midsummer, the first signs were visible. The north field produced its first healthy yield since before the drought. Not a full yield, but healthy, green and dense, the roots finding moisture the amended soil now held. Ormar came to find her when he saw it. Stood at the field's edge for a long time without speaking. "You were right," he said finally, not looking at her. "About all of it." She stood beside him and looked at the field. "I know," she said. Not unkindly, just plainly. He almost smiled. On the evening of the midsummer harvest, the first real harvest Bjornvik had seen in 2 years, the pack gathered in the square, not summoned. They came the way people come to a fire on a cold evening, drawn by warmth and light, because it was there and it was good. Someone had brought a fiddle. Someone else the first of the harvest bread, still warm, broken into pieces and passed hand to hand. The smell of it, yeast and grain, and the deep satisfaction of food after long deprivation, moved through the square like its own kind of speech. Freydis stood at the edge of it and watched. A pack diminished by cruelty and pride beginning, slowly, imperfectly, to become something better. Children who had known only the anxiety of a hungry season running between the legs of adults who were laughing. Ormar eating harvest bread with the expression of a man tasting something he had almost lost the right to. She felt Vidar come to stand beside her. "You did this," he said. "We did this," she said. He put his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, just slightly, just enough, and watched the pack that had once called her nothing celebrate the harvest that her hands and her gift and her refusal to become what they'd tried to make her had helped to bring in. The fiddle played, the bread was passed, the square was warm, and the earth beneath Bjornvik, drought-thinned, tired, slowly recovering, pulsed with the quiet, steady patience of living things that have been properly tended and are beginning, at last, to thrive. If this story moved you, if Freydis and Vidar found their way into your heart, then you already know what to do. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next story. Leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. Was it the moment Vidar said, "Wherever you go, I go"? The feeling of Freydis pressing her palms to the earth of a place that had cast her out, and knowing she could heal it? Tell me. I read every word. The next story is already growing, and it belongs to you.